Megan and her fiancé Eric drove through the narrow forest road, the old GPS directing them deeper into the desolate woods. They had rented a secluded house in Black Hollow for a weekend getaway, a chance to escape the chaos of the city. The Airbnb listing had described it as charming and rustic, but as the dense forest swallowed the last hints of sunlight, Megan felt uneasy.
The house came into view, a tall, creaky Victorian with peeling paint and shuttered windows. It stood alone, surrounded by overgrown grass and shadowy trees. Eric joked, "Looks like something out of a horror movie." Megan didn't laugh. When they entered, the air was cold, despite the fact that the heater had been turned on. The house smelled faintly of mildew and something else Megan couldn't place. The furniture was old, and the walls were adorned with faded portraits of somber-looking people. Megan swore one of the paintings was slightly tilted, but Eric dismissed it as her imagination.
As they unpacked, Megan noticed a handwritten note on the kitchen table. It read, "Stay inside after sunset. Do not open the door for anyone." Eric chuckled nervously. Creepy prank by the owner. Megan tried to shrug it off, but the unease wouldn't leave her. By nightfall, the wind howled outside, rattling the old windows. The couple lit candles to create a cozier atmosphere, but shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. Around midnight, Megan woke to a faint tapping sound. It came from the front door. "Eric," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Someone's outside." Groggy Eric got up and peered through the peephole. He frowned. "No one's there," he said. "It's probably just the wind." But the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Megan couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was just outside, watching. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Eric shrugged and climbed back into bed, but Megan couldn't sleep. The next morning, Megan stepped outside for fresh air. That's when she noticed the footprints. Bare, human footprints, circling the house in the damp earth. They were far too large to belong to either of them, and worse, they led to the front door, but not away from it. Eric brushed it off as an animal or a prank. Maybe the Airbnb owner's kids messing around, he suggested. Megan wasn't convinced. She insisted they leave, but Eric wanted to stay and enjoy their trip. "We'll leave tomorrow if you're still freaked out," he promised. That evening, Megan found an old, leather-bound journal in one of the bedrooms. Inside were frantic entries written by a previous tenant. "The shadows move at night. I hear whispers under the floorboards. They trying to get in." The final entry sent a chill down her spine. "Do not open the door, no matter what you hear." Megan showed Eric the journal, but he laughed. "This is classic ghost story nonsense." Frustrated, she threw the journal down. That night, the noises returned. This time, louder. Around 2 a.m., Megan woke to the sound of footsteps echoing from the hallway. Eric was still asleep. Gathering her courage, she crept toward the noise. The air felt colder with every step. When she reached the hallway, she froze. A shadowy figure stood at the far end, its back turned to her. It wasn't Eric. It was too tall, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Megan?" Eric's voice called from behind her, startling her. When she turned back toward the shadow, it was gone. Eric insisted she was dreaming, but Megan knew what she saw. She begged him to leave immediately, but he refused. "It's the middle of the night. Let's just go back to bed." At 3 a.m., the knocking returned, this time thunderous, shaking the front door on its hinges. A voice called out from outside, "Help me, please. Let me in." It was a woman's voice, trembling with fear. Megan hesitated, but then she remembered. The journal. "Eric, don't open it," she pleaded. But Eric, skeptical of her paranoia, marched to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a young woman, her face pale and tear-streaked. "She's scared. I'm letting her in," he said, unlocking the door. The moment he turned the knob, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Eric opened the door, but there was no one there. Only the cold wind greeted them. The door slammed shut on its own, and the house shook violently, as if something unseen had entered with the wind. "Eric!" Megan screamed, but he wasn't responding. He stood frozen, staring at the corner of the living room. Slowly, Megan followed his gaze. There, in the darkness, stood the figure from the hallway. Its head turned toward them, revealing empty, hollow eyes. Suddenly, Eric began to scream. He clawed at his face as if trying to rip something off that Megan couldn't see. She grabbed his arm and dragged him into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind them. Megan barricaded the door with furniture as Eric sat trembling on the bed, muttering incoherently. "They're inside," he whispered. "They'll never let us leave." Determined to escape, Megan grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Outside the window, she saw more figures emerging from the woods, their shapes flickering like static. They were coming closer. As the sun began to rise, Megan made a desperate decision. She dragged Eric out of the house and into the car. The figures didn't follow, but she could feel their unseen eyes watching as they sped down the forest road. When they reached the nearest town, Eric was barely coherent. He kept repeating the same words, "And they're still with us." Weeks later, Megan received an email from the Airbnb host. It read, "We broke the rule, no refunds." That night, Megan woke to the sound of knocking on her apartment door.